Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of YouTube videos to help the viewer play chess better. Today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about selecting and rejecting candidate moves. Candidate moves are moves that you're considering. What's the definition of a candidate move? Well, obviously a move you're considering, but another definition would be a move that does something. When I say it does something, I mean it either tries to achieve a goal that your side is trying to do, or hinder a goal that your opponent's side is trying to do. That's why it makes sense to ask yourself the question, what are all the things my opponent's trying to do? Or what are all the things his last move does? And answer that before you come up with candidate moves. Because if you don't know what someone's trying to do, how do you know whether or not it's worth trying to stop them? Okay, so I picked this position out of my library, and I haven't seen it for a long time. I have no idea what the computer says about this position. And I thought we would do it with black to move, and we'd look at what both sides are trying to do. It looks like black has just played bishop to g3 check, and white has played king to e2. So if we look at what white's trying to do, if we look at his last move, king to e2 doesn't threaten anything. It gets him out of check. And obviously white can't castle now. But what else is white trying to do? Well, white has a pawn on d5, which gives him more central space. And by playing h4, he's gotten black to play h5, so he has some eyes on the king side. And white's a little bit ahead in development. He has 3 minor pieces out, and black only has 2. So even though white can't castle, this game is far from, being a decisive idea on black's part, the fact that white can't castle. All right, so white is trying to do several things. He's trying to finish his development, get his queen and his rooks into the game. He wants to keep an eye on that h4 pawn that the bishop is attacking. And he wants to get his centralized pieces to be a little bit more active. All right, what's black trying to do? Well, he'd like to take advantage of that king in the middle, but right now with only 2 pieces out, it doesn't look like he's going to do anything really powerful against the king. He'd like to finish his development. He'd like to get his bishop on c8 into the game so it's not blocking the rook on a8. So let's take a look at how we would generate some candidate moves based on that information. Okay, so if it's black's turn, any move that is a check, capture, or threat would be a move that we would check to see if we should make it a candidate. All right, so checks. Do we have any checks? Doesn't look like it. Captures, bishop takes h4. Seems to just lose to rook takes h4, knight takes d5, there's 3 pieces guarding it. So it doesn't look like black has any captures. Threats, he might be able to generate some threats, but I don't see anything big right at the moment. So any move that would develop the bishop on c8 is going to be a candidate move. So bishop f5 is a candidate move. Bishop d7 is a candidate move. What else can black do? Well, black can blast open the center here. He could play e6 with the idea that no matter what white does on the following moves, black's going to be able to open lines in the center where the white king is. So e6 is the move that does that. If he plays e5, he gets a 4-on-3 majority on the king side, but white doesn't have to take en passant and open up the lines. So e6 is the move that opens up lines. Now e5 is a candidate move because it gets things rolling in the center. Notice when you play a move like e5, it has some of the same characteristics of e6 because in both cases, white can play d takes e6 because of the en passant rule. So e5 is a candidate. Black could also play a move like f5 with the idea of maybe playing, f4 or something and hitting the bishop, but that doesn't really seem to do too much. Now that's a good example of rejecting a candidate move. F5 is a move that brings up a pawn toward where the white king is. It gets that rook on f8 into the game. It seems to be a candidate move. The problem is that I would tend to reject that move after deciding that it might be a candidate because after that I don't see a follow-up. If I play f4, he'll just play bishop d4, and that seems to help white. I'm not going to play rook f6 on the next move. It doesn't do anything. So I think that e5 and e6 are definitely candidate moves, but I'm not so sure about f5. So right now we've got bishop d7, bishop f5, e6, and e5 as candidate moves. Can I reject any of those? For instance, maybe I could find which bishop move is better. Let's take a look at the two bishop moves. Bishop d7 gets the bishop out of the way, but it does interfere with the knight on b6 and the queen on d8. So that's a detriment. We have these pieces that also could move to d7, and when you put a piece there, those pieces are guarding that piece, but they're interfering with their capabilities of going there. So we put the bishop on d7. It's very safe. It does freeze the knight on c3 a little bit, because if that knight, let's say, moves to e4 to hit our bishop on g3, then bishop to b5 check can be a little bit annoying. Probably not anything winning or anything, but at least it makes the bishop on d7 look good if the knight goes to e4. So that's a possibility. There's another idea that white has that black has to watch out for, and that is white might be able to play a move like f4 to block the bishop from coming back toward the center, and then maybe play something like king f3, hitting the bishop and trapping it. So black has to be a little careful. Now that's another advantage of moving the e-pawn. If black moves the e-pawn, then if he plays e5, then f4 is not safe for white. And if he plays e6 and white plays f4, then black can play bishop takes h4 because the queen's hitting h4. So we've just noticed another idea here. This happens sometimes when you're trying to generate candidate moves, is an idea will pop into your head that didn't come up earlier. So here the idea of white playing f4 and maybe trapping the bishop comes into the game, which means we now have additional candidate moves for black, such as bishop to e5, where there's no way the bishop could ever be trapped on e5. So therefore, bishop e5 now becomes a candidate. So if we're looking at moves like bishop d7 or bishop f5 for black, we have to say, how would black save the bishop on g3? So let's do that right now and see if we can eliminate those moves. Bishop on c8 goes to d7, and let's say white plays f4. How would black save the bishop on g3? He could play e6 then. Now it seems a little strange to play e6 after bishop d7, because once white takes on e6, black no longer has the option of taking back with the f-pawn, because the pawn on d6 might be hanging. So bishop d7 blocks the queen from guarding the d-pawn. So it makes sense, if we're going to play that kind of defense, that we really don't want the bishop on d7. If we're going to play e6, we may as well do it right away. But let's look at it anyway. Bishop d7, f4. And what else could black play here? If he does nothing, then king f3 hits the bishop, and the bishop has no safe squares. So let's say bishop d7, f4. White could also play knight e4, hitting the bishop, but knight e4 is not as much of a problem as f4. f4 blocks in the bishop. Knight e4 hits the bishop, but then the bishop can go back to e5, where it hits b2 and can go back to g7 and help guard the king. I guess black, in some lines, has to watch out for bishop h6, and then on rook e8, he has to be careful that his rook on e8 can't be hit by a move like bishop a4, but bishop a4 is pretty much stopped by not only the knight on b6, but the fact that the bishop on c8 can always go to d7 to block the attack on e8. Now white could play bishop h6 followed by queen to d4 and threaten mate, but then black would play bishop e5, hitting the queen and stopping the mate. So after a move like bishop d7, bishop h6, rook e8, queen d4, bishop e5 looks perfectly good for black. That's why maybe f4 is a better idea for white, to keep that bishop out of the defense. So bishop d7, f4. Let's look at e6. e6. If king f3, bishop takes h4 looks okay. So we'll look at e takes, d takes e6. So we have bishop d7, f4, e6, d takes e6. And now black would probably, white's threatening e takes f7 check. So I would think that black would have to recapture on e6. So e6, we're looking at bishop d7, f4, e6, d takes e6, and let's play bishop takes e6 so that the queen would guard the d pawn. Bishop takes e6. So black in that position. All right, so let's do that again. Bishop d7, which I'm not too happy with at the moment, but I'm trying to prove that. We're trying to reject that candidate move. Bishop d7, f4, e6, e takes d6, bishop takes d6. But now we move the bishop twice. If we play f takes e6, then white might be able to play, let's see, if he plays queen takes d6, and we play bishop to b5 check, and he plays knight takes b5, then the knight on b5 is guarding the queen. Let's do that again. Bishop d7, f4. After bishop d7, f4, black can just play bishop g4 check, winning the queen. So therefore, f4 is not going to be a threat in any line where the bishop can get to g4. So I should have seen that sooner. And of course, when you're playing a slow game and you're not talking out loud like making a video, you'll notice those things faster. So f4 is an idea, but in order to play f4 and trap the bishop, white has to first move, let's say, move the queen. So where would he go? I guess he would go to d4. The queen would go to d4 and guard the h4 pawn and threaten f4, trapping in the bishop. So let's change our line and say bishop d7, queen d4. And now black can always play bishop e5. And then white's going to play a move like, I don't know, queen to d2 maybe? And it doesn't seem like queen d4 got very far. So bishop d7, not as bad as we thought. Let's look at those ideas with e6 right away. So e6, we're threatening bishop takes h4 in some lines, winning the h-pawn. Although winning the h-pawn doesn't probably win the whole game, it's not bad. So e6, d takes e6. And let's say black plays f takes e6. So now black has two central pawns on the d and e file, and white has none. And now black's threatening moves like d5, maybe followed by e5. The pawn on g6 is getting weaker, but we can guard that with a few pieces. Rook on f6, queen on f6, king on h7. So e6. What would white play on e6? He could play f takes e6. And if f takes e6, he could then play bishop g5, guarding the h-pawn. So let's look at that. e6, d takes e6, f takes e6, bishop g5. Okay, so black is going to continue to guard his d-pawn with the queen after bishop g5 with a move like maybe queen c7. And then the knight can fork the queen and the pawn on d6 with knight b5. So maybe queen c7 is not the best square, but if he plays queen d7, he's blocking in his bishop, which isn't good. All right, so we're looking at, so that means maybe he should recapture with the bishop. So e6, d takes e6, bishop takes e6, and that way on bishop g5, black can play queen d7, and he's not blocking the bishop anymore. Notice how we're sort of doing a little bit of deductive logic, but that gives white the central ideas of like knight to d5. It looks a little icky to play now on e6. If black ever plays bishop g5 when the pawn's still on f7, maybe black could just play f6 and make the bishop move. White could then play a move like bishop h6. So it's getting pretty complicated. E6 still a candidate. E5, again, white could take en passant and transpose into the line we just looked at, where we were looking at e6, d takes e6, bishop takes e6. We haven't really, we haven't completely eliminated any candidate moves. let's look at bishop f5. Bishop f5. Again, white can't play f4 because of bishop g4 check. That's the easy refutation. So if white wants to play against bishop f5, he could play knight e4. He could play queen d5. Bishop f5 is certainly a move you could play in a speed game without any problem at all. It really doesn't create any complications like e6 does. e6 is a move that tries to open up the center and take advantage of the white king there. Bishop f5 is just a developing move. So e6, if you're going to play it, is a much more critical move than bishop f5. Bishop f5, if knight e4, black doesn't have to play bishop takes e4. He could just play bishop e5. If white ever then plays f4, black still has bishop g4 check. Universal, we call that kind of a killer idea. So white's going to be developing his queen to stop all the funny business. So if black plays bishop f5, maybe white will play, I don't know, queen to d2. Could do that. Those are both reasonable developing moves for both sides. Bishop f5, queen d2. One advantage of playing f5 for black is that the knight can't go to e4, but I don't think that black's too worried about the knight going to e4. I think that he can always play bishop e5 on knight e4, and a move like knight g5 doesn't threaten anything. All right, so it's probably a little premature to play e6, is my guess. A computer might look further and decide he can get away with it through a move order, but for a human, it looks like he's a little bit underdeveloped for that. You know, e6, d takes e6, f takes e6 gives black a strong center but a weak king side. The f takes e6 blocks in the bishop on c8. It's true in some of those lines where the d6 pawn is weak, the bishop on g3 is guarding it. You know, we have this little cat and mouse game where in order for white to prevent the bishop from guarding d6 on g3, he has to play f4, which he can't. But if black has a pawn on e6, maybe he can play f4. So for instance, e6, d takes e6, f takes e6, then white can play f4 in that position because there's no bishop to g4 check. But it's very complicated. White could also play bishop g5 first. And now we said if queen c7, knight b5 hits the queen and the d pawn, but in that line, the bishop's still on g3 is guarding the pawn on d6. So we haven't really rejected any of those moves. It looks like all those moves are safe. It's really a question of what's the best way for black to continue here. If he plays bishop f5 first, and then he plays e6, the bishop on f5 has access to that g4 square and can't be blocked off by the pawn on e6. But on the other hand, the bishop would lose all his retreat squares after e6. And there could be some situations where white starts harassing, let's say he harasses the bishop on g3 with the knight, and if that bishop moves, then maybe white might even be able to play g4 in some lines. So it does get a little complicated. All right, so if I'm black, I still have those candidates. You know, if this was a slow game and I wasn't thinking out loud, you know, I would already be eliminating moves and saying, you know, I like bishop f5 better than bishop d7, and I think e6 is a little premature. And if e6 is premature, then maybe e5 is premature since white can take en passant and make that bishop on b3 a little better. I really don't want to make the bishop on b3 that good that soon. So I would, in a slow game where, you know, I wasn't making a video and I wasn't thinking out loud, I think I probably would start looking at bishop f5. So let's look at bishop f5 and see what are all of black's checks, captures, and threats. All right, we've already said that bishop h6, rook e8, bishop a4 is not a threat. White could play something to d4, like bishop d4 or queen d4. Not a problem for black. Knight e4 looks like the main idea for white, but he does have to finish his development. He could play something like queen d3 first. Sorry, not queen d3. Queen d3 puts the queen on prees to the bishop and takes the bishop. Queen d2 I meant. Bishop f5, queen d2. Both sides finishing their development. Then black could play something like rook c8. I don't see the white king as being in any big danger here. Bishop f5. If he plays knight e4, knight e4 at least is a threat. If black then plays bishop takes e4, f takes e4, white has the bishop pair, which is not inconsequential there. Bishop on b3 isn't wonderful, but it's not bad. Bishop f5, knight e4, black can just play bishop to e5, probably hitting the b2 pawn. White would then play something like queen d2. Maybe then rook c8, continuing development. Okay, so I kind of think that bishop f5 is my move. e6 looks a little dangerous, even though his king's in the middle. Opening up the king quite yet. I don't think black's army is quite ready for that. I don't think the bishop in g3 is in any danger. I don't think the idea on e6 that black is threatening bishop h4 is a big deal. I'm pretty sure that white can, in a lot of those lines, can either play bishop g5 or queen d4. He might even be able to sack the pawn on h4. So, again, my candidate moves are e6, e5, bishop d7, bishop f5. I like bishop f5 a little better than bishop d7. There's pros and cons between the two candidate moves. If he can play en passant anyway on e5, I'm not so sure that I would play e5 before I'd play e6. The idea on e6 is to just, if white doesn't take on e6, to then play e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes, queen takes, rook e8 or something, and get the rook on the e file. Yeah, we can't do it with the queen on d5 because the queen f7 check, yeah. But if he takes with the queen, we can play bishop e6 first. So that's kind of the idea, but it doesn't quite look right yet. So, when I say it doesn't look right yet, this is where I'm blending my analysis with my experience and my knowledge. So, I'm leaning toward bishop f5 here. Okay, so let's look at what the computer's top 3 moves are. I have Stockfish 11 here. Let's shrink the window a little so we can see the analysis. All right, Mr. Stockfish, what's the top 3? Okay, the computer says black is winning. See, my evaluation wasn't that strong. I thought black might be somewhat better, but I didn't see him as winning, even though white can't castle. Well, the reason he's winning is he's up a pawn, so that's going to be the main reason. Okay, so bishop f5 is fighting with knight d7 for number 1, and I had said that's one of the reasons why I didn't like bishop d7. Bishop d7 is number 3, because I said bishop d7 blocks in the queen and the knight. Bishop f5, and I guess I should have added that since black's up a pawn, bishop f5 makes more sense because you don't need to win the game by blasting open the center right away. Since you're up a pawn, you could just kind of slow play it, and bishop f5 is the best slow play move. So I'm giving myself a good mark for having bishop f5 as my top candidate. Give myself a lower mark for the video for not mentioning that black was up a pawn. All right, so I think e6 is a mistake. It's not in the top 3. Let's force e6 and see how bad it is. e6. All right, so it's not that bad. Black was ahead by about 1.9 in the line with bishop f5. In this line with e6, his lead drops to 1.05 right now in 26 ply. It says the main line here is d takes e6, bishop takes to keep this pawn guarded, as I said, even though the bishop's guarding it. Bishop takes, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, queen d3, hitting the pawn on g6, queen f6, guarding it. And now looks like white can play something like rook a f1, and black's lead is about -1. But if he just plays bishop f5 and slow plays it, his lead is closer to -2. So bishop f5, as I had gathered, is much safer move than e6. All right, so I picked this position because I hadn't seen it in a while. It was in my library, but I kind of forgot about it. We wanted to look at what are both sides trying to do. We're trying to look at how do we pick out the candidate moves. We're looking at whether we can reject them. We didn't do a great job of rejecting any out. The best way to reject a candidate move is if it's not safe. And some of those moves were not too safe. But when we got down to the final four, they were all safe, but we had to pick the ones that did the most. And I'm happy to say that I did pick out the one that had the highest evaluation. But it wasn't 100% clear, but that happens in chess. You know, you don't always have one candidate move that jumps out way ahead of the others. And the whole idea when you're picking out candidate moves is pick out as many as you can that are reasonable. You can't play what you don't see. And then try to winnow them down through either finding out that they're not safe or by looking at analysis for looking a couple moves deep to see what kind of things both sides can do and how good they are, and get a feel based on your judgment, your experience. When I first started out, I played out about 2,000 annotated master games to get a feel for what people are trying to do, which positions are good, which positions are not so good. There's really no substitute for that kind of thing. You can't, give someone a pill and all of a sudden they know everything that you know and now they have the same feel that you do. They have to develop their feel by doing those kind of homeworks. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed today's video for our YouTube series. This is Dan Heisman. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.